And we're on. Good evening. Everyone, welcome. My name is Mark Mamagonian. I had to look down at my notes to confirm that. But I am the Director of Academic Affairs here at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NAASR. Thank you for being with us tonight here in our building and online. I hope your taxes are done. It's April 15th. Did you know that until 1954, April 15th was actually March 15th, that March 15th was tax day? I just learned that recently. I thought I would share that with you. Following this program tonight, we will welcome your questions, both those of you who are here in person and those of you on Zoom who will need to use the Zoom Q&A function. And once that concludes, we will have a reception here in the building, and we invite you to stay and enjoy some refreshments, and you will also have the opportunity to purchase The Burning Heart of the World and other titles by Nancy Kricorian, which will be on sale tonight for 20% off the regular price for today only, online and in person. And the book sale will be here out in the solarium here on the third floor. I would like to just mention a couple of upcoming events. Next week on Thursday, April 24th, here in this room and online, in commemoration of the 110th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, we'll present a hybrid talk by Professor Lebanese Civil of Clark University titled April 24, The Origins of Armenian Genocide Commemoration Day. And prior to the talk, there will be a musical prelude by pianist Tanya Bartevian. And Professor Semerjian is here with us. Please wave to the crowd, Elise, and you will get to hear from Elise next week. On Friday, April 25th, online from Los Angeles, Bedros Nermatosian will present a hybrid program entitled Sahag II Kabayan, Catholicos of Cilicia as Witness to Massacres and the Armenian Genocide. He will be speaking at UCLA and also online. We encourage you to check that out as well. On Sunday, April 27th, at the Armenian Cultural Foundation, we're pleased to be co-sponsoring a conversation and reception with author Nanore Barsoumian, author of To Go On Living. This is, again, at the Armenian Cultural Foundation in Arlington. And on Thursday, May 8th, in person here at NAASR only, not online. It's in person only. It's real old school stuff. We're happy to present the 4th annual Vartan Gregorian lecture presented by Huri Berberian and Talin Grigor, the Armenian woman minoritarian agency and the making of Iranian modernity, 1860 to 1979, here at NAASR in person only. Tonight's program is being offered as part of the ongoing Literary Lights series of programs that has been initiated by the International Armenian Literary Alliance in partnership with NAASR and the Krikor and Clara Zorab Center at the Armenian Diocese in New York City. It's a pleasure for us to partner with these organizations on these excellent programs that bring attention to new works by Armenian writers. And I would like to invite our friend Nancy Agabian, who is a board member of Yala, as it's called, to come up and say a few words about the series and what is coming up. Nancy.
Thank you so much, Mark. Yes, I'm part of Yala, which is a writer-led, mostly volunteer-run organization that supports Armenian writers from aspiring to establish. So we're just really thrilled to be a part of this and to present Nancy Kricorian and her eagerly awaited novel in conversation with Nanore Barsoumian. Nancy has been an inspiration to so many Armenian writers, myself included, and has been a strong advocate for Armenian writers. So it's really an honor to be able to do this, and also especially, as Mark said, in partnership with NAASR and Zorab Center. So this is actually the 3rd year of partnering to present authors with their new books. And this is the 2nd event of the season. We have 4 more The next one will be May 10th with the poet Gregory Janikian. If you want to find out more, you can check out our website, armenianliterary.org. You can also talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or if you'd like to get involved with Yala. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. As always, I feel compelled to remind everyone that the work NAASR does is made possible by the support of our members and donors, in short, by you, for which we thank you. And please, if you are not a NAASR member, join now in this, our 70th year of supporting Armenian studies. And I urge you also to learn about the co-sponsors of tonight's program, Yala and the Zorab Center, and support them as well. Later on, we will raffle off a signed copy of The Burning Heart of the World to a lucky NAASR member. If you're already a NAASR member and here in person, please sign the sheet that I believe Ani Babayan is passing around the room. So please do sign in with your contact information. And if you're on Zoom, we have your contact information, and if you're watching on YouTube, send us an email and say, hey, I'd like to be part of this raffle, and we will get you a signed copy of the book if you are the lucky winner. So, it's a huge pleasure to welcome back to NAASR a great writer, colleague, and friend, Nancy Kricorian, who will be in conversation with another wonderful writer, colleague, and friend, Nanore Barsoumian, centering on Nancy's new novel, The Burning Heart of the World. Nanore is a Boston-based writer and researcher. She has served as the editor of the Armenian Weekly, as well as the assistant editor prior to that. Her articles focus on books, politics, and human rights, while her scholarly research has explored genocide memorialization and denial. She is currently working on her debut novel, so we're looking forward to the day when she will be in the other chair and speaking to someone about her newly published book. And her review of The Burning Heart of the World was published about a month and a half ago in the Armenian Weekly. If I may be personal, briefly, the very first NAASR I attended as an employee of NAASR was a talk by Nancy Kricorian in connection with her debut novel, Zabelle, on February 5th, 1998, in a different century, a different millennium.
In a different building.
In a different building, a different everything. I remember very well in his introduction to her that night, for some reason this has stuck in my mind, that Manuk Young mentioned not only was Nancy a talented writer, but she was also a generous NAASR member. And she has remained so through all of these years while continuing her journey as one of the leading Armenian-American writers of our time. Nancy was born and raised in Watertown, as I think many people here know, and she is the author of 4 novels about post-genocide Armenian diasporan experience, including Zabelle, which was translated into 7 languages and has been continuously in print since 1998. That's quite an accomplishment. Dreams of Bread and Fire, 2003, and All the Light There Was, 2013. Her essays and poems have appeared in an illustrious list of outlets, and she has taught at Barnard, Columbia, Yale, and New York University, and elsewhere. She has been the recipient of a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, a gold medal from the Writers' Union of Armenia, and the Anahit Literary Award. She lives in New York, and she has been a member of the NAASR Board of Directors since 2016. She's also a member of the Board of Directors of Yala. I urge you to pick up a copy of The Burning Heart of the World, and again, it is on sale tonight in the solarium on this floor, and she will surely sign a copy for you. It's a beautiful novel that gets at themes that will no doubt resonate with many of you. The stress and the scars that living through violence, displacement, and exile place on us, old and young, from generation to generation. I found it enormously moving and was able to keep myself together until I got to the last page and the 2 words written on it in Armenian, Zhogovortis Hamar, for my people. And then I did kind of lose it a little bit. But please welcome Nancy and Nanore.
So I'm going to read a little bit. I have 3 short pieces to read. One is a description of a one-page description of my literary project. The second is a poem that I wrote when I first started working on this novel. And then I'm just going to read 2 pages from the novel itself. So here is the Statement. Notes. My new novel, The Burning Heart of the World, is the fourth in a series of works focused on the post-genocide Armenian diaspora experience. Zabelle, published in 1998, is a fictionalized account of my grandmother's life as a genocide survivor and immigrant bride. Dreams of Bread and Fire, from 2003, tells the story of a young woman of my generation coming to terms with the unspoken family and community trauma of the genocide. All the Light There Was, published in 2013, is set in the Armenian community of Paris during the Nazi occupation. My latest novel tells a story of a Beirut Armenian family before, during, and after the Lebanese Civil War. The Burning Heart of the World features an Armenian family that witnesses three catastrophes over 4 generations: the Armenian Genocide, the Lebanese Civil War, and the 9/11 attack on New York City. It is about women who struggle to cope and to take care of their families in times of mass violence. It is also about the way that these traumas reside in the bodies of those who survived them. Historical memory is passed from one generation to the next so that a new trauma opens old wounds. But along with showing the vulnerability these histories create, I pay tribute to the strength of the Armenian families in all my novels. I aim to be a voice for my people, not in a narrow nationalist sense, but in the broadest humane and artistic sense, inspired by writers such as Vasily Grossman, Ghassan Kanafani, and Etel Adnan. April 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the start of the Lebanese Civil War and the 110th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. My new novel reverberates with both cataclysms, and it appears at a time when Lebanon and Armenia have just experienced more paroxysms of violence, suffering under existential threats to their sovereignty and territorial integrity. My novel is a journey through these histories and into this burning heart of the world. The title evokes both illumination and conflagration. The world is on fire, and while there is much darkness in the book, there is also humor, empathy, and a commitment to amplifying that which is humane in the human. This last is central to my literary project. And this poem, when I first started doing the research for the book, I had thought I was going to put the family in Bord Chamud, and I went to Beirut 3 times and did a lot of research, and I ended up choosing Nur Hajin, which is because it was very small, and Bord Chamud is quite large. But I was really fascinated by the history of Bord Chamud, and Nur Hajin is sort of quasi part of it. It's just over the bridge. So this is a poem that I wrote, which sort of encompasses the history of Bord Chamud, which is a municipality just outside Beirut city limits that was built by Armenian genocide survivors. So, homage to Bord Chamud. Have you heard, this is an epigraph from Khalil Gibran. Have you heard a thrush sing while its nest burns in the wind? Listen. In the morning, you can hear the bright strike of hammers and the rasp of saws. Children carry sand from the riverbanks in their school satchels. First, they build the church, then the school, and finally a house for each family according to its means. The tents and shacks are taken down one by one. Each family plants a mulberry tree and tends its garden. The remnants of Marash create a new Marash. And so also Nur Sis, Nur Adana, Nur Geligia, and Nur Hajin are made. You can hear the sounds of the trades learned in the orphanage workshops, carpenter's plane, sewing machine, and cobbler's bench. The sharp smell of the tannery is in the air and in their clothes. All Beirut wears their shoes. Look at the children outside the church in their freshly pressed clothes, and the girls have ribbons in their hair. Look at the food spread on the luncheon table and the hands that pass the platters. Someone has told a joke and there is laughter. Someone pulls an instrument from its case. Speak of those times or don't, when the parties take up arms against each other, how the women of one church throw boiling water out the window on the men with guns. When all Beirut stops fighting, for how many more weeks do the Armenian men continue to shed each other's blood? Speak then of the flowering, the neighborhood children grow tall. Among them are musicians, actors, painters, and poets. In this world their parents have rebuilt from ashes. They now believe anything is possible and everything is new. Remember this, when the Civil War comes, neutrality is no amulet against the bullets and the bombs. Jewelers flee the downtown souk for Bord Shamud, where the militiamen patrol the night and then also the day. So many boats leave the port, carrying leather suitcases to the airports. So many are exiled again. Remember nor Adana, nor Marash, nor Sis. Men still play backgammon and grill meat on braziers on the sidewalk. Remember the narrow alleys and wooden houses of Sanjak camp, raised for a shopping plaza. O people of long memory, listen, look, speak, remember. Your stories are a homeland. Last bit, where in the novel, there's a brief prologue which is set in Lebanon in 1973. Then we go forward in time to 9/11. In the prologue, Vera, who's our main character, is 8 years old, and now we're seeing her on 9/11 in New York City. And the only other thing you need to know, she's an artist, she's a collage artist. So this is the day after the 9/11 attacks. Vera and her college friend Emily, whose painting studio was in the basement of her Brooklyn brownstone, had regular Friday phone dates. That morning, Emily told Vera that when she had heard about the first plane over the radio, she had climbed to the roof in time to see the other plane slam into the second tower. Emily said, "It was like a special effects scene in a disaster movie. I decided right then to get my kids. On the drive to the school, I had a clear view of the towers. After they collapsed, scraps of paper and ash fell on the car. Then a finger landed on the windshield." Vera said, "A finger?" Emily said, "Yeah, a finger." On the way home, the wind was blowing south. There was so much smoke and dust, it was like driving through fog. Jeannie told me the dust is filled with toxins. You should have your house tested, especially the roof. Jesus, think about the computers, thousands of them, and all that jet fuel. I can't talk about this. I haven't been able to paint. I can't focus on anything for more than 10 minutes. Later, when the phone rang, it was Vera's cousin, Arda, who lived in New Jersey and worked in the financial district. Arda said in Armenian, "I just heard the worst story." Vera braced herself. Arda continued, "My friend's cousin was in the tower when the first plane hit. They all ran for the exits. The police ordered them back to their desks so they wouldn't block the stairwells for the firefighters." While she listened, Vera slid the elements of the collage she was working on around the paper. A ballet dancer in an organza skirt, a bouquet of roses, a flight of swallows, and pieces of striped gross-grain ribbon. She imagined setting a match to the whole thing. Arda went on, "They all went back to their desks, except my friend's cousin. She sneaked out. She was a few blocks away when the towers fell. Everyone else is gone." That night, after the kids were in bed, Vera and George sat at the dining room table paying bills. She wrote the checks, and he slid them into envelopes, then stamped and sealed them. While they were working, she recounted both stories she had heard that day. She was fixated on the image of the finger on the windshield, and she was haunted by the idea that people who did as they were told ended up dead. She said, "I'm afraid I would have gone back to my desk." "You would have run," George said. "I guarantee you would have run." Vera wished she could be so sure. She thought about her mother's father, who had decided not to return to his hometown after the First World War. The Armenians who had survived the deportations and returned to Hajan had held off the Turks for several months in 1920. "In the end, they butchered them like sheep," her grandfather had said. How could you know when it was time to flee? How would you have the courage to disobey the orders? How would you decide to turn right on the road rather than left? Only later would it be clear that one path had meant survival and the other had led to a mass grave in the desert.
think we do need a minute with that one.
Just sit with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
sit for a minute.
All right, thank you for that reading. It's the poem was incredibly moving and powerful, as was the opening. And this novel itself is, in turn, sad and enchanting and funny at times, and I'm not sure how you manage all that. And I want to first congratulate you, because I finished this book with tears in my eyes and this strange sense of arrival and relief, as if I had arrived home. And that makes so much sense with the poem that you read too, where you talk about how
Our
the
stories are our homeland.
Yeah.
Your stories are our homeland, right?
And the other day I read an interview that you had done with a war photographer, Aline Manoukian, who had documented the Lebanese Civil War.
Yeah.
And she had a really interesting quote in there. And because you asked her about exile, if she felt like she was in exile, I think that was the
Yeah.
question. And she said, everyone in Lebanon has a village they come from. Can you feel like you belong to the country if you don't have a village? Can you feel like you belong to the country if you don't have a village? And going back to your poem, I mean, we're talking about Nor Marash, Nor Hajan, all these places, the old village, the new village.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Why did you, because Hajan is very central in your book.
Right.
And the place you chose in Lebanon to center it was Nor Hajan.
Yes.
What does that, why? And
Why did I do that?
Yeah.
I was really, in that, you could tell that from the poem, I was just really fascinated by this idea of people who had survived the genocide and made their way to Beirut, and then they were given this, this area. Borj Hamoud was actually like a swamp when they first got there, and the people organized themselves back into the communities that they had come from. So the people from Marash got together and made Nor Marash. The people who came from Hajan got together and made Nor Hajan, and so on. And I just thought that that was so fascinating, this idea of being uprooted and exiled and yet rebuilding together again. And I picked Hajan because my grandfather was born in Adana and my grandmother was born in Mersin, but my grandmother's family came from Hajan. Her parents were born there, her grandparents, and the other reason, this is just like a writer reason that I picked Nor Hajan, was because I thought, I'm gonna do Borj Hamoud, everybody loves Borj Hamoud, and it's so amazing, but it was huge. It was just too big. It was like wandering around. I couldn't, when I'm writing, I want the experience of reading it to be an immersive experience, and so I really want to be able to reproduce the place that I'm writing about in my head and then reproduce it in the book so that if someone who was from Nor Hajan would read it, they will recognize what I'm describing, the church, the school, the streets. And Nor Hajan is very small. It's only like 3 blocks deep, wide, and 4 blocks long. So I just was like in there walking around, interviewing people. I met the doctor and his nurse. I went in the church, I went in the school, I went in the social club, I went in some of the houses, and I was able to reconstruct the whole thing in my head to then place my characters in it.
Because there is a very strong sense of place.
Right.
Like you were born there almost, And I read that, you shared in interviews that this book involved a decade of research and writing. And you traveled to Lebanon, you said 3 times.
Yes.
You read extensively about the
Yes.
Civil War. You interviewed around 40 people. What were some of the challenges you faced during this research? And did you feel a particular pressure to get it right compared to your other books, say?
No, I feel the same way in all the books that I did. The first 2 were easier because they were more grounded in my personal experience and my family experience. But when I did World War II Paris, I was like over there doing the same thing, wandering around Belleville, interviewing, all these elderly Armenians who had been in Paris during the Nazi occupation, reading tons of history books, reading memoirs, reading diaries. And I did the same thing for Beirut. But I had actually lived in Paris, so I had the advantage there that one. But no, I did a ton of research, and I love doing the research, and I particularly love doing the oral history. And if you check the back of the book, the acknowledgement page just has a list of like all the Armenian people that I talked to. It's like a very, very long list, some of whom are in this room.
I think you're one of them, maybe?
Nugol gets a special
Nugol,
shout
yeah.
out because he like really took me around places, a lot of places.
So in terms of, because it is so grounded in a specific experience and in a specific place, I'm curious as to how much of your writing was, like, how did you balance the fiction versus the truth?
Yeah.
And related to that, I'm curious about what kind of a writer you are. Are you one of those writers who plots extensively, or do you sort of find your way through the story as you begin writing it?
I find my way through the story as I'm writing it. I don't always have it plotted out ahead of time, and I also do a lot of drafts, which is why there's so much time between my novels. And I would say with this one, because I did so much research, the first draft was probably 125 page longer than this, but it was just bristling with facts in a way that was not successful. But it was just, I had so much research and I knew so much, and so I just put it all in there. Like, I knew everything about the different, I mean, don't ask me now because I've forgotten it all, but at that time I knew all the militias and what flags they had and what, when they were allied with which other groups, and, the shifting alliances through the war, and like all of that, and it was kind of all in there. And then I thought, listen, the Civil War section is the character Vera is between the age of 10 and 15. So she's not going to have all, do you know what I mean? She's not going to, this is not Vera. I had to go back and pull all that
Well, I found
apparatus out.
it was a strength in the book, because I think it is cumbersome, like the politics, especially with the Lebanese Civil War politics.
Right.
It's just so involved.
Oh, you
so
should see, I
tedious.
had maps, I had diagrams, I had like timelines, and I mean, I have all that stuff still, but yeah.
Maybe another book.
What? No. It's like the iceberg kind of thing, that what the book is, like all the research and everything is like under the water, and you just get the tip of it.
And you do get that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. And so going to themes, actually, your work, it was the case with The Burning Heart of the World and the previous one. I found both of these really play with this juxtaposition of these big catastrophic moments and these small, mundane, everyday moments.
Yeah.
And I find that very powerful in your writing. So in this book, you have bullets flying, you have body parts falling from the sky, as you read, and then you have Vera's aunt, who's my favorite character in your book, by the way.
The cousin, you mean?
The aunt, the
Tantig, but that's actually her mother's cousin,
okay,
but she calls her
Your mother's-
Tantig. Yeah. Yes.
So she's my favorite because she's so eccentric, and she has these quirky things. And so there's these ceasefires, there's a ceasefire every other day, starts, breaks, and she just starts, every time there's a ceasefire, she unwraps her glassware. And then the fighting starts, and then she wraps them up again and just hoards them. And she does this over and over again. And I find that it's so pointless, but at the same time, it's something really powerful in describing this. And so I want to know, why did you draw our attention to these, to this
the
contrast?
details? Because I'm really interested in how people live through these cataclysmic, violent events. And even when you're in the middle of a civil war, you still have to get dinner on the table, and you still have to, it's like even with Vera, there's all this stuff going on. There's a Quarantina massacre, and she sees all the people, bloody people coming out of Quarantina, but then she has a crush on a boy at school. That's
You don't
the
stop
way people
being-
live.
Yeah, you don't stop living.
I mean, I have to say, even because I have, through this literary mentorship program, I've involved with mentoring young writers in Gaza, and I'm in touch with them some of them on a daily basis, and so it's like one night, it's like the house next door is blown up and nobody's asleep, and there's quadcopters flying all over the place, and then the next day, like one of my mentees, her brother got engaged, and they had a small engagement party. These things they're side by side, they go together.
Yeah. It's powerful, and it's funny because I have one memory that's really strong from Lebanon, because I saw some of the war too, and it's this memory of one of our neighbors. He lived on the 4th floor, we lived on the 5th floor, and one day we find him out on the stairs on the landing in his undershirt, and he has the mangal, the barbecue. He's barbecuing chicken or whatever,
Yeah.
and the smoke is just filling up the stairs. There's not a single window. And it's just, that's what I remember from the war so vividly, is this man on these stairs, the dark stairs. We also had no electricity.
Right.
And he's making his kebab, and you got to keep living, I guess. And I love that you focus on these things. But there's also a lot of trauma in this book, but it's very subtle. And neither the reader nor the characters seem aware of it, really, as it unfolds. It surfaces later in entirely different setting in the 9/11 scenes. Can you talk about your choices and how you portrayed trauma, especially your decision to foreground the story in the aftermath of the World Trade Center attacks?
I mean, part of that was that I was in New York on 9/11, and I had a friend who was in my lifelong quest to learn Armenian, was my Armenian tutor, who lived next door. She was a grad student at Columbia, and she was completely freaked out by the 9/11 attack, as we all were, but for her, she was just having nightmares about she was from Beirut, and she was having nightmares about the Civil War, and I could tell other Armenian friends from Beirut, like everybody was talking, and everybody, it just reopened all this stuff for people. So I had that person in mind when I was thinking about shaping this, and I wanted to show the way that I think I said that the past traumas reside in the body, and you have ways of coping with them, and you have ways, like there's Vera, American Vera. She has a whole new life and a new identity and wearing new, making this American life. But then when the World Trade Center attacks happen, Beirut Vera is awakened in her, and she starts coming undone. I don't know if I quite answered it.
Yeah, and what I noticed was the memories that she has are so much more vivid than when she's living them later. As we find out, these scenes, she's kind of like glances over them. It's not, she doesn't really linger on those moments of violence or death that she's seeing.
Right.
But the older Vera,
I have a really interesting story that I did that interview with Aline Manoukian, who's a Armenian photojournalist in Lebanon who was worked for Reuters, and she was like the bureau chief she ended up being the bureau chief for Lebanon and Syria, but she was like 19 years old when she started as a war photographer in Beirut. And she told me a story which I'm like a magpie, people tell me stories and I use bits and pieces and build a nest out of it. She told me the story about seeing the Quarantina massacre, the day after the Quarantina massacre. It was 1976, there was this horrible massacre in Quarantina, which it comes from the word quarantine, and it was originally a refugee camp for Armenian genocide survivors. And then over time, a lot of Armenians moved. There were still some Armenians there, but a lot of Armenians moved out, and there were a lot of Palestinians and Syrians, and a lot of Palestinians who were living there. And the Phalangists went in 1976 and massacred, killed people. And Aline told me a story. She said, well, her father's good friend had a furniture factory in Quarantina because it had been there from when it was an Armenian neighborhood. And he wanted to go see what had happened the day after the massacre, what had happened to his furniture factory. So Aline, her father, her friends, her father's friend and his daughter, the four of them got in the car and drove to the scene of the massacre. And there were dead bodies all over the place. And Aline said to me, she said, her friend said to her later, did you see all the bodies? And she said, no, I didn't see any bodies. And she had just completely repressed it. Like she said, she told me I got so many great stories that I didn't end up putting in that interview, but she said, no, I said, there was a man's head. I saw a head. There was a bit of roof had collapsed and I saw the top of somebody's head, but that's all I saw. And her friend had seen like dozens of
Something similar, I think,
corpses.
happens in the book too, right?
Yeah. Well, I repurposed it. The brother
yeah.
ends up going, and the mother is like so furious. So she's like to the father, "Why would you take your son to see a massacre?"
She's the voice of reason sometimes in that book. She's great.
Yeah. So, anyways, that was. I think that people have different coping mechanisms. And back again, also to my friends in Gaza, 2 of my mentees got out of Gaza before they shut the border. There was like in late March of 2024, and they had been there, first from October to March, with all, just witnessing all kinds of just horrific violence. But they had just managed, and when they got to Cairo, they completely collapsed. Because when you're in it, you just have to hold yourself together. It's like a survival mechanism. And then it's only later where you can look back on it, I think, and register what you actually survived.
Someone was giving a talk recently that I watched about the Armenian genocide and the women. Was it you? Yes, it was you. And you were talking about how all these girls, the women who survived their escape from enslavement post-genocide, and they made it to the safe house, and they would make it, but then they would die soon after. But they would make it to that point, and then just, So, Anyways. But since you talked about Gaza, I'm curious about the language you use when you talk about some of the more violent scenes. And in recent years, we've seen poetry, especially from Palestinian writers like Musab Abu Toha, Rifat Al-Arir, and Fadi Juda, and poetry is used as a powerful response to violence, and it's almost reclaiming dignity and humanity in the face of horror. You also did an event recently with Shahe Mankerian, whose poems speak to the horrors of the Lebanese Civil War.
Yeah.
And in your own writing, we see the same poetic impulse. So a boy doesn't just simply bleed out on the pavement. Instead, a bright red flower blooms in the center of his white shirt. Why does poetry step in at moments of extreme violence? Is it a way of preserving dignity? Is it a gesture to humanity? Or is it something else, like something that serves the reader? Are you shielding us?
I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it a lot, but I think that you're right. I think it's twofold. I think it's, I don't know, I think sometimes as a writer, I get very focused on trying to describe something in a fresh and original way, and I don't always register how devastating it is. You know what I mean? It's like the poems that you're talking about by Musab Abu Toha and Rifat Al-Arir and Fadi Juda, they're pretty devastating, right? I don't know. I know that there was the, post-Holocaust, there was like, how can you write poetry after the Holocaust?
After the disaster.
Right, after that kind of disaster, but you still do. And I think there is a bit, I really didn't want the violence to be graphic and grisly, but I wanted it to be evocative.
I think you succeeded, because I think, I think it was a really sensitive way of describing things, but without really sensationalizing any of the violence. One of the novel's major themes is the tension between personal needs and collective identity. So being a good Armenian versus being a good mother, or choosing personal safety versus community preservation.
Right.
So we've seen this play out recently in Syria and Artsakh, and you capture this tension beautifully in 2 lines of dialogue. Okay. And I think that's masterful, just the way you just summed it up here. The grandmother asks, "What will become of our people?" This is when everyone's leaving, right? Everyone's emigrating. And she's like, "What will become of our people?" And the daughter-in-law, Vera's mother, replies, "So I'm responsible for the fate of the Armenian people?" So, how did you approach this theme? Because it's a loaded topic, but how did you approach the theme of exile, or sort of like willingly leaving a community and the guilt that involves with it? Because I think that's the guilt is really it runs through the book.
Yeah, it's a very, isn't it? It's like a very Armenian thing, you know, that each of us is personally responsible for the fate of the Armenian people and the fate of the Armenian language and the fate of the Armenian monastery, and we're all somehow implicated in, maintaining all of this, I guess. And but in that particular thing, that was actually her mother. That she was talking to is Vera's mother was talking to Vera's grandmother in Borchamud, where the mother's side of the family lives. And it was just like, it's this moment where, the tension I was also playing with is like, the kids are like, yay, we don't have to go to school. We get to be in the bomb shelter and play dolls. And so the kids are like, I had people tell me that, when I was a kid during the war, it was so great. We didn't have school. We just got to play with our friends all the time. And it was like, from the mother's perspective, she's just in a horror that any minute, like her kid's going to be killed. And she has to try to keep them safe. And so she's making a decision that she has to get her kids out of there. And she has, if that means abandoning her mother-in-law, so be it. If that means abandoning the Armenian people, so be it. She's going to take care of herself and her kids. So there is that. I mean, I feel like that right now with some of the students that I work with in Gaza, who are going to be allowed to leave, it looks like, but probably are going to be required to sign a paper saying they won't come back. So they're having to leave Palestine, they're having to leave their families to go have a future, go to university, because all the universities have been destroyed. So I feel like this, with these huge catastrophes, with ethnic cleansing, with genocide, with these kinds of war, people have to make, all these calculations about their families and their communities, and make these very, very tough decisions. And there's a lot of loss, like Vera and her family end up leaving Beirut and leaving the beloved grandmother behind.
It's, but you do the issue such justice by like honoring the complexity of the situation, and it's not a simple answer. And I think you really make that case that it's never simple. Across all your novels, it seems that many of the characters are trying to salvage something from the past. Your work often feels like a negotiation with loss, an attempt to snatch something back. What is it that you're trying to retrieve, or does the act of reaching become?
I think that it's in that poem, the Borchamud, that poem that I read, that your stories are a homeland, that in the face of all this loss and catastrophe and, what do you have left? And everybody has to come to a different answer about what it is that they can save, what it is that they can rebuild, what it is that they can be responsible for. And because I'm a writer, I think that I put all of that into the novels.
Yeah.
One
more question?
Just one more.
Okay, one more.
And then we'll open it
this
up.
One, I'm curious about the ending. Sorry.
10-part question.
Okay.
The ending of your...
honestly, this is like, she's my ideal reader. You should see the review that she wrote. It's like, but go ahead. Yes, one more.
The final question.
Okay.
So, the ending of your book blew me away. It was so powerful. I was crying. I was stunned.
But we can't have a spoiler.
No, zero spoilers. Zero
Okay.
spoilers about the content, but I have a question about the form.
Okay.
So you mentioned in a recent interview that you read 50 to 60 Armenian folktales in order to strike the right tone for the final scene.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? What was so important about getting that tone right, the Armenian folktale tone? Why was that important to you? Why end on that note?
Because I wanted at the end, I did the same thing in Zabelle. There's a folktale-ish at the end of Zabelle, also set in Hajin. And so it's sort of like they're bookends to each other. It's back, we're back in Hajin, we're back with the folktale. And there is one folktale that I read numerous times that made me cry pretty much every time I read it, which is called The Monastery of Doves by Tumanyan. I don't know if you know it. There's the Turkish soldiers or wherever coming, they're going to massacre all the people in the town. And the priest says, can I save the people I can get in the church? And so the Turkish, or whatever official says, yes, you can, whoever you can fit in the church, you can save. So every single person in the town comes into the church, comes into the church, comes into the church. It's physically impossible for this many people to be in the church, but what's happening is they're all turning into doves and flying out the window of the church. And that story was so, so powerful. And I read a lot of other ones. I wanted to, have other sources of inspiration. But birds are a huge theme through the book. I mean, there's even the epigraph, my heart is like a house in ruins, the beams and splinters, the pillars shaken, wild birds build their nest where my home once was, which is from Gomidas on Duni. And so the last chapter, I wanted it to be a magical gift to the reader.
It was.
Okay.
It really was. I mean, and I'm done.
Okay.
I think it would be appropriate to clap. And then
Okay.
Again, in the room, if you have questions, please amble up to the microphone. And if you're online, you can do the online equivalent of that. I'm glad you mentioned birds. I was going to ask about birds, too, because it's obvious that you're a bird person. And
You want to hear something crazy, which my kids didn't even know this. I said this at a reading the other night, which was, there are all these birds, and you're a birder. And, I actually became a birder in order to write the book. I started birding at the same time that I started researching the book, because I knew that was, like that epigraph also to the poem, the Khalil Gibran, have you heard a thrush sing while it watches its nest burn in the wind? That was something that I wanted built in from the beginning of the book. Was there another birding question?
No, I think that was it, actually.
Yeah, but then now I'm like completely crazy avid birder, which and that's going to be for the rest of my life. But it started out as part of the research for the book.
I was planning on counting the birds to just tell you how many, because I have them here. I took notes of all the birds. It's amazing. But they're not overwhelming. You don't really notice it that much,
Yes, they're definitely woven in, I hope. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a magical spell. Yes.
Right here.
Over to here. Yes. Thank you.
As an Armenian and as a displaced person, you are giving that to your offspring. And I also lived in Paris, and there was an old man. He had been brought to Paris as a young child. There was a rich Armenian who had an estate someplace in France, and he brought 17 children. He gave all his money to the First World War cause for France, so there was none left. And he, as an Armenian, you couldn't get papers to work in France, even though he had been brought as a child, until after the Second World War. So he became a tailor.
A what?
A tailor. He could make suits. He told me he made 2 suits for de Gaulle. But he always felt if he had come to the United States, he would have been a rich Armenian American. But he didn't get to the States. And so he gave to his daughter his unhappiness of his own life, that the French won't be fair to you. I knew another Armenian in Paris, a young man from Beirut, who was absolutely delightful. Everyone would like him. And he was making gold jewelry, which he could do in Paris because there are a lot of Armenians and he could work for them. But he didn't have papers. So he went back to Beirut during the Civil War and became very depressed at the situation and was saying, for the Armenian community, you have to pay off one side, and you have to pay off the other side. They're going back and forth, and you feel caught in the middle and yet not a part of this. And so I think it's a huge question how you give this, how you give yourself in this situation. You have your original place from having left Turkish Armenia.
Yeah, can you talk about the issue of passing along trauma to children? I mean, is there any way out of that? Is there any way to mitigate it? Is that even possible?
I mean, I don't know. I think that there is intergenerational transmission of trauma that occurs even on a nonverbal level. And I'm not a science person, but there is even research showing there's epigenetic changes, in the DNA, the body, from these experiences that gets passed down to the next generation. I guess that it's not like I feel like any of this is hopeless. I feel like, there are all different ways of managing trauma and trying to mitigate, passing it along, but I don't know. I don't have the answers to that.
I think it's a good thing, too. You want
Yeah.
to pass on your experience.
Please.
Yeah.
I wanted to partially answer that. I think art helps us process trauma, and that's one of the gifts of your work, is that we get to see a window into ourselves in all of your books. So I can tell you as a writer, I feel like so much of the reason I do it is to process trauma, and I think, like I said, we get that gift from reading your books. My question is, could you talk a bit about your vision to write about diaspora communities and how that evolved through your career?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that the books sort of linked, like links in a chain almost, one to the next. The first one was a fictionalized account of my grandmother's life, which I started writing after she had died as a way to keep her with me, I guess. And so I did that, and while I was working on that, the next one is going to be, I was completely fixated and fascinated with Monty Melkonian, who was a member of a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary group who they were using political violence for the Armenian cause. And I was just completely fixated on this idea of someone of more or less my generation whose grandparents had been genocide survivors, who grew up in a very American community playing like Little League, who ends up becoming this Marxist-Leninist revolutionary running around putting bombs in airlines offices or whatever. So that's how I got to there. And then when I was researching that book, so I was looking at, I went to this film festival of documentaries about non-state actors who use political violence, and I saw this film called Terrorists in Retirement, which was about a French resistance group in Paris led by Misak Manouchian, who was an Armenian poet and worker and communist. And I saw that movie and I thought, oh my God, that's where I'm going next. So then I went to Paris and I was doing all the research for that book, Armenians in Paris, da da da. And while I was there, the person who was taking me around was an Armenian from Beirut who lived in Paris, and he was introducing me to like the last surviving member of the Manouchian group and a woman whose family, an Armenian woman whose father was a shoemaker who lived in Belleville, and they had taken in a Jewish child, one of her schoolmates, when the Vel d'Hiver roundup happened, and they rounded up all the Jews and were shipping them off to camps. So I was doing that during the daytime, interviewing all these people, and then at night, in the evening, I was hanging out with my friend Hagop and all his friends from Beirut, and they were, one of them, you know, Hagop had been a playwright, he had two of the friends had been folk singers, and I was like, wow, this is where I'm going next, Beirut. And I'm just really interested in the different varieties of experience, the different histories, the different ways that different generations in different locations lived. And there are things that are particular to wherever the nation that they're living, the place, the country, their adopted country. But there are things that are just, I don't know, universally, but like similarly Armenian in all these different locations. Did that answer it?
Do you know where you're going next?
I call this the Armenian Diaspora Quartet, so there's 4 of them. I feel like right now I'm finished with the novel thing, and I'm working on a series of essays that are sort of autobiographical essays that are, I think is going to, I did one that's called Language Lessons, that's about the Armenian language and my grandmother and my relation to her and the language. And then I did another one called His Driving Life, that's about my dad who had a market in Watertown and started driving the delivery truck when he was 9 or 10. And so that, and then the next one I'm going to do is about my Uncle Leo, who was quite a character when he was a teenager. He was the junior yo-yo champion of New England. And then he went on to become the very popular Armenian guitar player in an Irish wedding band for 30 years. So I'm working on that one now. So that's what's happening.
Let's sell some books.
All right.
In the first class.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nancy, Nanore, that was fantastic. Thank you for talking about the book and the process of writing it. And it's wonderful, and it really is a fantastic book. I really encourage you, pick up a copy. If you're watching online, you can order it online from us or from some other fine bookseller, but order it from us. And you can pick it up out there, and Nancy will set up and sign. And if you didn't sign in to win a signed copy, please do so. And thank you so much. Hope to see you all next week if you're able to. Thursday night, you'll hear Elise Submergent's very interesting lecture on April 24th. It's on April 24th, and it's about April 24th. See you then.